at all times, there's two things that I think I had and that I would say any entrepreneur, anyone wanting to be an entrepreneur has to have. And I think was one, a core skill. So for me, my core skill was around marketing and public relations. I knew I had this core skill, and so I knew I could promote something. So I knew it would kind of, regardless of what kind of business I started, I was going to be able to promote it. The second thing that I had was I had what I consider like a personal board of directors. And this is like a group of people, former professors, former high school teachers, mentors, former bosses, a group of people who I would say, again, regardless of anything that I did, they were going to believe in me and they were going to support me. And so those two things really equipped me with the confidence that, you know what, even if I fail at this, I have a group of people who care about me, who are going to help me, and I'm going to fail forward. I'm going to learn fast. So those were that kind of gave me that confidence to do it.
On this episode of Establishing Your Empire, I host Joah Spearman. Joah is the CEO and founder of Localeur, who has helped more than 5 million people experience traveling like a local, from insiders who share authentic recommendations on their favorite local places to eat, drink, and play. Joah started Localeur in 2013 by asking a dozen friends in Austin to recommend their favorite local spots before the South by Southwest festival. Joah's path has been anything but straight. His career started by working for the Texas Longhorns while in college, then a speechwriter in DC, and his first business was a social media consulting company, helping to turn Austin's Rainy Street into a nightlife district. After that, he opened a sneaker boutique in downtown Austin, right underneath the mayor's office at City Hall. Then he convinced the founders of South by Southwest to let him create and run the first ever fashion part of that festival. Somehow, the combination of all these experiences gave Joah a unique perspective of what travelers really want when they visit a new city, authentic recs from locals. Now, some 180 cities later, it seems to all make sense. You're listening to the Establishing Your Empire show, a podcast that inspires entrepreneurs, creatives, and future business owners to pursue their passions, grow their organizations, and build their empire. My name is Daran Herrman, and creatively, I'm best known for my photography. But business-wise, my claim to fame is growing a company from $15K per month in online sales to breaking the $1 million a month barrier. And I'm sitting down with interesting people to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how they have established their empires. All right, I got Joah here on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here. This is my first podcast, not in the home office. I'm in Hermosa Beach, doing this remotely, and really excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And Hermosa Beach is not a bad place to be. Well, before COVID, I would go out to LA at least a couple of times a year, and even if I was staying in the city, I would beeline to Manhattan Beach and do the run down Manhattan Beach, Hermosa, all that. So I love that area.
Yeah. So why don't you give us a quick background of who you are for those who might not know who you are, right?
Yeah. Again, my name is Joah Spearman. I since I was, a kid, I've had to say it's Joah, like Noah with a J. Not Josh, not Joel, but Joah. I live in Austin, Texas. I am an entrepreneur. Right now, I'm on my fourth business. The first three were they touched in sneaker retail. I had a sneaker boutique in downtown Austin, and then that morphed into me creating and running the first ever fashion segment of South by Southwest Festival, which I did 2011-12. And then that transitioned to me getting recruited by a startup in Austin called Bazaar Voice that went public in 2012. I was the director of operations there before the IPO. And after the IPO, I pretty much cashed out and decided I was going to do something of my own in tech. And I started a company called Localeur, which the premise is really simple. We want to help travelers experience local instead of going to where tourists go. So we started literally with 12 of my friends in Austin sharing their favorite local spots in Austin. And now here we are 7.5 years later, where we have locals in 188 cities around the world sharing their favorite places to eat, drink, shop, and during COVID, obviously pick up food to go.
Awesome. So let's go back all the way to the shoe store, Sneak Attack, right?
Yeah.
What it's called.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you started that company?
I was 26, and simultaneously I had started a social media consulting agency And the agency is actually what gave me the confidence to do the sneaker boutique, because I had never done anything in retail. Sneakers was just a passion of mine. And mind you, this is back in 2009, and the recession was still going on. It was not necessarily the best time to start a business, especially in retail. But for me, I saw in the recession, I also actually saw a lot of opportunity, because I saw a lot of sneaker boutiques around the country that were closing. And so what I actually did is I skipped several steps, and I basically got in my car in Austin. I drove to all the sneaker boutiques between Austin and Virginia and talked to the owners and was like, hey, like, how's business going? A lot of them weren't doing good business. And I, in essence, bought a lot of their inventory off. So that's kind of how I got my business started.
Oh, I love that. So what, one of the questions I always ask is like, there's so many people out there that want to start a company, and like, hey, it's very similar to 2008, 2009 right now. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of new companies will start throughout this new recession, but, and you were saying kind of social media company, or that gave you some confidence, but what actually got you to pull the trigger to move forward? Right.
Yeah. You know what?
Any thoughts there?
Yeah. What I would say is, I think at all times, there's two things that I think I had, and that I would say any entrepreneur, anyone wanting to be an entrepreneur has to have. And I think it was one of really a core skill. So for me, my core skill was around marketing and public relations, and kind of doing things on the brand communication side, which is different from most entrepreneurs. Most of them are like probably in finance or engineering and things like that. So for me, I knew I had this core skill, and so I knew I could promote something. So I knew it would kind of, regardless of what kind of business I started, I was going to be able to promote it. The second thing that I had was I had what I consider like a personal board of directors. And this is like a group of people, former professors, former high school teachers, mentors, former bosses, a group of people who I would say, again, regardless of anything that I did, they were going to believe in me and they were going to support me. And so those two things really equip me with the confidence that, you know what, even if I fail at this, I have a group of people who care about me, who are going to help me, and I'm going to fail forward. I'm going to learn fast, and I'm infinitely employable. So those are that kind of gave me that confidence to do it.
And how do you, any advice for people to get a better core group of people around them, whether it's mentors, in person or virtually or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is, take advantage of being in learning mode. I think what happens is people feel this insecurity of, oh, I'm not an expert in this, or I don't know this, so I don't feel confident going to someone who is. And I would actually say, flattery is your friend. So if it requires flattery of someone who is an expert, of someone who does have a seat at the table, in order to get introduced to them, in order to get some time with them, then do it, because you really don't have anything to lose if you're in learn mode. And I think that's one of the issues I find with a lot of young people that not so much the people that I mentor, because I think a lot of the times they're kind of beyond their years, but I think my generation, millennials and even younger, I think that a lot of what social media has done is it's created this dynamic in which people think that they can do something for a few months and get results. And I always say, I do a lot of speaking gigs at colleges and high schools and whatnot, and I always say, you don't get credit for anything that you don't do for at least a year. So, not until day 366 should you even be pointing to it as something that like you should get some kind of credit or recognition for. So I think when you initially start something, you really should stay in learning mode. And you should stay in that place where when you're meeting someone, you're not trying to project any kind of expertise or anything, but you're trying to project eagerness to learn. And that's the best thing that I could say is, I think it's it works across the board, regardless of industry, that people embrace people who feel like they're quick to learn and want to learn.
And there's so many areas to where like even the experts really a lot of times are still not unsure. They're still unsure of themselves, right? They're sure they don't even know if they're experts still, right?
Oh, I mean, I get imposter syndrome all the time.
Yeah, I mean, all the time. But the thing is you're willing to try and you're trying to figure it out, right? Mm-hmm. And when you get a hurdle, you're gonna figure out how to get across the hurdle,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So you have the shoe store and all that. How did you get involved with South by Southwest?
Well, honestly, through failure. I had the sneaker boutique, and I had it for. What happened is I started out doing pop up sneaker sales. So I basically, my thesis was I could sit here in a brick and mortar and wait for people to come here every day, or I can show up where they are. And so I would do these pop ups at bars, at rap shows, at festivals, and those would be really successful. But the problem was with the brick and mortar, it had a higher cost structure, had a higher burn rate. And so after about 16 months, that business model didn't work. I wasn't really built to be a merchant or a retailer. Um, but thankfully, what I was good at, again, like I said, I was good at kind of marketing, communications, public relations. And so I had built this great brand around Sneak Attack. And the byproduct of building that great brand is that I had built a really great community. So I had people coming in my sneaker boutique and just hanging out like for hours. So I kind of built this community hub for sneakerheads in Austin, and then all these people who kind of wanted to associate with sneakerheads would come by too. So, for example, the a lot of the main people at C3, which is the company that does ACL Festival, Lollapalooza, a lot of those people would just come by and hang out with me, you know. And so through that process, I actually met a couple of the executives at South by Southwest Festival. And one day I was just kind of honestly just hanging out with them. And I was like, man, you guys do something in tech, you do something in film, you do something in music. Why don't you do anything in style? Because that's so a parallel with all these other creative industries. And they were like, well, they were kind of like, look at us. We're like, these kind of like old, middle-aged, whatever white guys. Like, we don't really know about style. We know about gaming and tech and, music and all this stuff. And I was like, I kind of get it. So basically I said, hey, why don't you let me come up with something that I think works for South by Southwest? So I in essence spent about 9 months of 2010 simultaneously as the sneaker boutique it was becoming very clear that the sneaker boutique wasn't going to have a long life. I was spending time developing this program for South by Southwest. And in essence, by the end of 2010, I got them to agree to, in essence, what was a joint venture where they fronted the resources and I built the team and the infrastructure of how to do it. And in 2011 and 12, we basically did a multi-day expo in which we had dozens of up-and-coming fashion boutiques, or sorry, not boutiques, but brands. So kind of very much like the music festival. So we had like instead of emerging musicians, we had emerging brands and designers. Instead of performances and shows, we had a runway show with the clothes from these brands. We had panels with different people in the fashion industry. So that's kind of what came out of that. And again, it all came from me failing at the sneaker boutique, but taking what I did learn, which is around building community and applying it to South by Southwest.
So I think there's a lot of value there for a lot of people who are struggling with COVID, business owners, because what you did there is you saw the trend of, retail's tough, right? There's the labor costs are high. I've owned retail before. Yeah. It's not fun.
No,
it is all the time. Whether, if it's Christmas all the time, I would be in retail.
Yeah,
of course, because that's a good time. Yeah. But it's not fun when it's 6 p.m. and there's nobody in the store.
Yeah.
But the foresight, the pivot, and to do it not when to see that it's going down, but not wait until it's bad. So you still have a little bit of abundance where you can act from, and a little bit of time, a little bit of runway.
Yep.
So let's talk about South by Southwest 2021. I mean, what's your thoughts going to happen? With virtual, any thoughts around like how this world is going to be, and March?
Yeah, you know what? I would say one is a disappointment, and my disappointment is both in a way in South by Southwest as an organization and in the city of Austin that it didn't have a better plan for South by Southwest potentially not happening. You would think for an event that's happened for over 30 years that there would be some type of plan around, okay, if this can't happen for various reasons, then we have a backup plan. And I'm so a little bit disappointed to see that there wasn't too much planning around that. But from an opportunity standpoint, this is what I see happening. I see South by Southwest proceeding in 2021. I do think, however, they're going to have to, I would argue, professionalize it even more. What I mean is they're going to have to give up some of that serendipitous feel of South by Southwest of people just walking around aimlessly, not knowing where they're going to go. And they're going to have to make it much more of a kind of more constrained conference type scenario where people are still getting the information and maybe some of the networking. But they won't be able to have those serendipitous moments of walking down 6th Street or 4th Street and running into someone that they haven't seen professionally in 5 years, that type of thing. So I think in 2021, it will happen. It will be professionally meaningful. Will it be as fun? I think that's going to be pretty much impossible, because even if we assume there was a vaccine for COVID before then, the adoption won't be high enough, I think, by March of 2021. And now, one thing that I think could be interesting is if South by Southwest was willing to consider, and if the city of Austin were willing to partner with them in potentially pushing the festival out, into later in the year. So maybe they decide South by Southwest 2021 is happening in October of 2020. In that case, then I could see them having a full on regular South by Southwest. And but the issue with that is South by Southwest has traditionally relied on that time during spring break in March, when UT students and Austin high school and public school students are out. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, but I do think that there will be something in 2021.
It's tough because I've always loved South by Southwest too. Like you said, just walking around, not knowing where to go. I did photography for them for 5 years. And it's fantastic and terrible at the same time. But you would stumble into some things, meet some people. I think there's some ways we're going to have to figure out some ways to virtually do this, right? Like this is, and that's some opportunity for some people to really figure out how can we actually get that where you can meet people that you didn't mean to meet, right? And get around very interesting people, right? How can we do that? And I think we're going to see some companies do this.
I think so too. I think that the issue with South by Southwest is you have, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think they had something like 30% of the people were coming from the coast, New York, LA, that type of thing. 25% of the people were coming from outside the United States. Another maybe 25% coming from other parts of the United States that aren't the coast. And so I think that the issue that they're going to have is not only if they try to do something virtually, not only are there the tech hurdles of pulling it off, but there's also the problem of having this disparate group of people who pay attention to what you're doing. And so in a lot of ways, South by Southwest, I think, would suffer from the lack of unified adoption of one specific type of technology. Like in the US, obviously, we're all using Zoom, but I don't know if everyone in Hong Kong or in Sweden is using Zoom, right? And so they're going to end up being in this position of like trying to put tech adoption onto people about certain platforms and things of that nature. So I think that's where smaller contained things are going to be more powerful. So I could see maybe even South by Southwest, if they did something virtually, they're trying to break it up into these kind of like half day mini conferences. Maybe there's a half day for 300 people who care about AI, and there's a half day for 300 people who care about ed tech or whatever. But then you kind of silo everyone, so you don't get that serendipity as much. But I think something like that could work as well.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, and it'll be exciting to see how it turns out. I'm definitely rooting for it. I'm a huge fan of the festival.
Yeah.
So let's continue on the story. So what I know next happens is Bizarre Voice, right? So how did that come about? How did you get in? My brother, by the way, worked for Bizarre Voice near similar time, very shortly after you, still pre-IPO.
Yeah.
He's a computer programmer, software architect. So tell us that story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really think that I don't know what the actual wording is, but it's like luck is when hard work meets opportunity, and I very much subscribe to that. And I would say getting a job at Bizarre Voice was probably one of my breaks professionally. And what happened is while I was running the sneaker boutique, actually the very month that I was starting to wind it down, in late 2010, I was asked to moderate a panel on social media for the Macomb School of Business, which is the MBA program at University of Texas. And on that panel were several tech executives in Austin, including Heather Bruner, who at the time was the chief operating officer for Bizarre Voice. So through moderating that panel, I was able to impress upon her that I, was smart. I knew the space. And so after the panel, she pulled me aside and she's like, "Oh, I'd love to learn more about you and talk." And so I went and met her and told her about my business background, my sneaker boutique. I think at the time I was working on South by Southwest, launching in a few months the event there. My social media consulting, and basically she was like, yeah, we would love to have you work here. And her and Brett Hurt, who was the founder and CEO of Bizarre Voice, they basically started recruiting me for the better part of three and a half months. And they were like, I remember Brett saying, I got my MBA at Wharton, and I'm telling you, if you come work at Bizarre Voice, even for a year, this will be like getting your MBA. And that pretty much sold me on it, because it was the combination of working for Heather, who I've always been super impressed by her. And I think she's just an amazing leader. And the promise of being able to work at a tech startup that was kind of gearing up for an IPO and learning all that stuff. It was just too good to pass up. And so basically I shut down my consulting business. I closed the sneaker boutique. And by April of 2011, I joined Bizarre Voice. So it was really just the timing was right. And Heather especially was someone who understood that I had a unique skill set that was probably well suited for the unique time they were in. They were only going to go public once. And typically when tech startups go public, that's exactly that time where there's a big kind of exodus of talent. There's a lot of friction between the people who were the original people, the founding team, versus the new people who get hired. And I thought she kind of viewed me as someone who could help with that transition.
And real quick, Bizarre Voice is basically you're the biggest ratings and reviews behind the scenes player, right?
Yeah.
You see ratings on Walmart, Best Buy, places like that.
Yeah.
Those are all curated by a third party company like Bizarre Voice. And in fact, they got basically a monopoly clause or whatever specifically it was, because they got a little too big on it.
It's funny.
Very tough.
It's so funny that all that happened, because it's like, it wasn't like it was this massive business, but there were some anti-monopolistic things that possibly were happening. But what's interesting is, like, I look at what's happening today with the big tech companies, and it's like, wait, these companies are worth like trillions of dollars, and and only just now are they getting the same type of attention from the Justice Department that Bizarre Voice was getting in 2012.
and Bizarre Voice had like 25% of the market cap,
Yeah.
so it wasn't like they had 90% like some of these companies, right? And completely control things. So, but you left rather soon, right? Like you got out kind of early. So, how? Tell us that story. Like, why did you leave, and what did you leave for, right?
Yeah, so I basically got to a point where I had been there for about 16 months, and I was the director of operations. And then after the IPO, I basically transitioned to a position where I was kind of helping with market strategy and thinking about other industries that the Bizarre Voice could focus on, travel being one of them. So I spent basically my last 5 months at Bizarre Voice thinking about the travel industry. And Bizarre Voice is working with big hotel companies like Hilton and IHG, Holiday Inn, the big cruise companies, the big airlines. And in going to meet with these clients or potential clients, I was learning that there was this huge gap. And the gap that I saw wasn't anything around transactions, which is where all travel companies typically focus on, like booking flights or hotels, accommodations. The gap that I saw was around content. TripAdvisor at that point was a very mature business, had already been around 15 years. And I could see that Airbnb was on the rise. And even in 2010, 11, 12, when I was using Airbnb initially, I could see, man, this is going to be a really big business. And this is going to really kind of dictate the terms of the future of travel in a lot of ways. And TripAdvisor didn't feel like a business that was ready to match that from a content standpoint. And so to me, I felt like my background lent itself towards trying to possibly build something that could be kind of like the new generation of a TripAdvisor for that Airbnb type of customer. And so basically around Labor Day of 2012, I decided, and I had the head of product at Bizarre Voice, the head of marketing, a lot of different people at Bizarre Voice were kind of encouraging me to stay and potentially help with their teams. But I really felt like, what's the next best move I can make that I'm gonna be really proud of and invigorated by for the next year, 2, 3 years at least. And that felt like starting my own thing. So that's pretty much what I did. And so the timing worked out because it was at the kind of peak time of what the stock price was as well.
Right, but yeah, great. You get out at stock price, which is great. But like you left, I'm assuming a pretty good paying job, right?
Oh, very.
And
Yeah.
yeah, right, right. Because Bizarre Voice was on the up and up for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And did you have like how far along on
No,
your new company were you?
not far. I mean, the name of the company wasn't Localeur. There was nothing built. We didn't have a deck. We didn't have a business plan. We had nothing. All we had was this premise. And I say we because my co-founder, he also left Bizarre Voice, and he was a designer there. And so we didn't have anything. Honestly, I think I left Bizarre Voice in early September 2012, and only in late September did we really start talking about I mean, we had mentioned it, but that's when we started getting serious about, okay, this is a thing. And it wasn't until late October, early November that I really decided for myself that this was going to be the thing that I was going to focus solely on. So what happened is, my co-founder and I, we spent about 6 weeks leading up to, it was probably early December, thinking about the business plan, and we ended up renting out a room in Capital Factory, which is kind of a startup incubator in Austin. We rented a room there in downtown Austin for a weekend in early November, and we were like, we're going to hash out the entire thing in this room. And what I did, we agreed on like probably 80% of things, but that last 20% was creating some friction. So what I did is I brought in a startup friend who's more of a CFO type of guy. I flew him in from San Francisco, and I said, I can't tell you on the phone what this is about, but can you just spend the weekend with us? So he agreed, and he came down, and he basically acted as our arbitrator for the weekend. So my co-founder and I would spitball the ideas, and he would listen to them, and then if we didn't agree on something, then he would hear both of our arguments, and then he would help us kind of decide which way to go. So through that, that's how we kind of landed on what is now Localeur, which is this more or less a content-driven platform where it's not about locals hanging out with travelers or tourists, all this stuff, or giving experiences. It's more about locals know stuff. They have content and insight that tourists don't have. No matter how many reviews a tourist writes on TripAdvisor or Yelp, locals have more insight, and we created a platform where those locals could share it with travelers.
And I think, and this is what you hit on, I think completely is, time is so important, right? And some people, like I'm pretty lucky, I get to travel pretty often, but some people only get once or twice a year, if that, right?
Yep.
And they want the best trip ever, right?
Yep.
And then they don't want, and there's some people that, hey, look, I want to go all the tourist stops, whatever, Disneyland, but there's people like me that I don't want to do any of that, right?
Yep.
Show me like where I want to get the hamburger that's that place or whatever it is.
Yep.
Where's the actual place to go? Where do locals hang out? I want the true experience. I love Airbnbs because I want to stay in the middle of it, right? In fact, right out to my door is like there's a restaurant next to me, and you got to go and watch them kind of working. It's but I love that, right? And you get immerse yourself in the world.
Yeah.
So I get really excited about your business.
Yeah.
But before we get too crazy into it, so this is something that I think is very interesting. So you're starting a startup, you've burned the boats, no income.
Yeah.
How, like what's you hash out your ideas. Like, do you start getting funding? Do you start building a team? Like what's your next steps?
Yeah. So the main two things that we were focused on, or that I was really focused on, was one, I personally needed to have 100% conviction around it, so that I could not. There was no half measures. It was like I have to fully believe in this, and that didn't happen until we spent that weekend in Capital Factory hammering out the rest of the business plan. So once we did that, I went from like 70% to 100%. And I was like, okay, this is what I am doing. And I made a personal promise to myself that I was going to do this for at least 7 years. I literally was like, I don't want to do something for a year or 2 years. I have so much conviction around what we're trying to do that I think we may be so far ahead of the market that I have to do this for 7 years. And so that was the level of conviction that I needed to have for myself. And then once I had that, I made a list of about 12 names Some of these were people from my personal board of directors that I mentioned, but 12 names of people who I thought could be potential early investors. And I set up meetings with them. Some of them were former clients of mine for my social media business, people I worked for before, that kind of thing. Um, I made a list of those 12 names, called them or met them all, and 8 of those 12 people invested. So that was by the first week of January of 2013, I'd raised about $150,000 from people that I knew or were adjacent to those people. And we used that money basically to build the first website. We spent 2 months building out the first website with contract developers so that we could launch by Southwest that year.
And then, okay, so friends and family around basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, so you got the website built. What happens? Does it, a lot of people start going, like, or is it crickets, right?
No, thankfully, again, my skill set at this point, what I learned is my first skill set was around marketing, communications, PR. So we got some attention and we got some early press. So that helped. And then the second thing is the sneaker boutique and the South by Southwest experience taught me how to be a community builder. So when we started, what I did is and I'll just go a tangent for a second and say, I wanted to pick the best people in Austin to share where they go. So what I did is I created this almost like a 40 questions survey about Austin, and I sent it out to a bunch of friends and said, hey, I'll pay $50 to anyone who fills this thing out. And so I had like 35 people, I think, fill this thing out. And I picked the 12 best people based on their responses and said, you 12 are the first 12 localers. You seem like you know Austin the best. And I had them each share their 5 favorite places in Austin. So the day we launched, we had about 12 people in Austin sharing their 5 favorite places. And it was March 1st. It was a week before South by Southwest. So the timing was great because now you have all these people coming in from all over the country, all over the world to Austin. They want to know where to eat, where to drink, where to hang out. And so the combination of the timing before South by Southwest, plus we got a little early press. When we launched, we were just in Austin with these 60 places. But by March 10th, we had 5,000 people on the site. So it gave us the ability to quickly say, okay, see, there's a use case for this. People need this. Now by that point though, we only had enough money for, I think at that point we had enough money for like 8 more days. and also we had enough money for like another week or so. And also South by Southwest was going to end in a week or so. So we were like, what's going to happen to our traffic when this is, and so then we pretty much, we had success. But we immediately, we were under the gun to raise more money and to prove that this thing could work, even if it's not South by Southwest.
And I want to get to fundraising a ton, but I do have to, I have to ask, how did you come up with the name? Like, what's the story behind that?
Yeah. So, the first name, I'll tell you this. I don't think I've ever said this in an interview or anything. So the first name of the company, the first deck, it was a company called Travel Us, and it's spelled like Travel US. And we were like,
right.
So that was the first name of the company. And we were like, and we were like, it's very US sounding, but we were like, it is kind of a nice word, and so we tried to buy the domain. And
yeah, I was gonna say, that sounds like an expensive domain.
Yeah, well, so it started out and it wasn't. It was like $1,500. And then the guy was like, oh, no, I $5,000. So we went to our first investor and we're like, would you give us $5,000 to buy this domain? He was like, okay, I will. So he was going to give us the $5,000. So we went back to the guy and he was like, oh, no, it's 150. And so he just, I think he was just like probing people into this kind of auction scenario or something. And we were like, okay, never mind. So the morning that we found, I think this was like, I want to say it was like December 27th or 28th of 2012 when that happened, when we found out from the domain guy that it was going to be 150,000 now. And we were like, we're not doing that. So I remember my co-founder texting me and telling me that. And then we spent like 6 hours on the phone, just texting all day. And basically he came up with the word, and I basically gave the word the meaning, because he was like, we were playing around with like Localeur and stuff. And he came up with Localeur, and I was like, oh, that's great, because it's like, it's like a connoisseur of local, or it's like, or restaurateur or entrepreneur. It's all these, we're in this era where like that means something to a certain set of people. And the thing that it really does too, two things. One, when you add that EUR in a word, it adds a certain level of discernment, So it's like, if someone says they're a restaurateur, that means they own a group of restaurants, but that they don't mean that they're a franchise owner. No one says I'm a restaurateur and they own like 10 Pizza Huts.
Yeah, and I think the Travel US would just been a bad idea. It'd been great because people would have remembered it really easily, and it would easy to spell, all that. But like, what brand is that, right? That'd been a tough one. So I want to dive into fundraising a lot. Yeah. So because I have my own questions on this, right? So all right, you're out of money, and unfortunately, you only got like a week, before you're out of money. It sounds like. What worked? What'd you do? Like, what you wish you would have done? What obstacles? Like, let's just wherever you want to start, and we can just keep diving in.
Well, you said actually earlier. I can't remember what we were talking about, but earlier you used a word that I think is really, really apt, and you mentioned the word abundance. And what I would say is the problem, and the thing that I wish I had done is I'm thankful for the journey that we've had and how everything worked out. But if I could do it again, I think we launched, and by the time we launched, we had only raised about $150,000. I certifiably would not have launched unless we had about $400,000. Because.
And real quick, do you think you would have got it? Do you think you would have got 400?
I think this is what would have happened. I think we would have missed South by Southwest. But I think we would have gotten it if I had been willing to wait until summer. But for me,
do you think that start would have been as good, right? Because that's kind of a killer start right before South by.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm getting to, and sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
It's just like sometimes, it sucked that you only had 150, but maybe that's the reason.
Yeah.
You bootstrapped it the way you're supposed to, right?
Yeah. So I'm thankful that we did that, because what South by Southwest gave us is it gave us the best possible launch use case. And then it also gave us a great time to get a lot of press. Because in the middle of summer, like, you're competing with every other startup in the world. But during South by, it's like South by becomes the center of tech press. So that helped that worked. We got Mashable. We got like all these different things that happened in our first few days. It was crazy. So I probably would have tried to raise more, or I would have certifiably called our launch a South by Southwest beta and intentionally said, we're just going to beta this during South by, and then we're turning it off because this is the use case, right? And then I would have raised against that beta test. But that's not what happened. We kept it on. But thankfully, what did happen is because of the South by Southwest success, and we didn't have money. But back to that word abundance, what we did have was we had an abundance of confidence that if we did have the money, we were going to succeed. And I think that's the challenge of, starting any business is like trying to act from a place of abundance and not scarcity, because scarcity, it's a forcing function, and sometimes it can be good for you. But for the most part, I think scarcity forces you to make the kinds of business decisions that your either well-funded competitors or the people who come from better financial circumstances don't have to make those kinds of decisions. And so as a result, I think that you end up curtailing the scope of your business. I think a perfect example right now is look at Uber. Uber was not first in that industry. Lyft started before them. Sidecar started before them. A lot of people don't even remember Sidecar. But those companies, Sidecar raised a small seed around, I think even a small Series A. I think Union Square Ventures invested in them. Lyft had raised a decent size, I think, Series A. But then Uber came out and they just started raising these crazy amounts of money. So it allowed Uber to spend those first few years acting out of pure abundance. And even though they were making mistakes and whatnot, they could cover their mistakes with abundance. And so, and the thing is, it'd be different if Sidecar and Lyft had these, Black female founders, and it would have been hard for them to try to match Uber dollar for dollar. But truth be told, like John Zimmer and the guys in Logan Green, those guys at Lyft, they could have raised every bit as much as Uber. but they weren't seeing it as big as Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camport, right? So I think Uber kind of set the terms for the industry by realizing that they could use abundance as a growth driver as opposed to just using like business mechanics.
I think in my own experiences that is when you are pressed and kind of in that scarcity mode, is you make a lot of short-term decisions, not long-term business decisions. Because like let's get revenue, let's figure out, let's and that is and because you have to if your payroll's due in 4 days, you the long game is hard to see, right?
Yeah,
I love it.
That's what COVID. I mean, just to jump forward a little bit. I mean, with COVID, I think you have two different things happening. You have a set of businesses that have to make short-term decisions to stay alive, and then you have a set of businesses, probably in the minority, of which I'm very thankful to be in which businesses have the ability to make longer term decisions. And so that's when you're in that scarcity brain, you're not only servicing the short term, but you're also preventing yourself from making long term decisions later, because you're forcing your customers, users, investors, whatever, to get used to making short term decisions. So a big thing that I've realized throughout the 7.5 years of running Localeur is, as I'm communicating with my investors, I want to show them at all times that I'm making long-term decisions, because if you make short-term decisions, you kind of sink or swim by them. So even if you do something really good for like a month or two, now you put more pressure on yourself to do something really good in the next month or two, because it becomes this kind of what have you done for me lately cycle. So I think it's really important to just, even if the business is trying to force you into scarcity mode, to try to stay in abundance mode, because not only are you going to make better decisions long term, but you're also going to keep the pressure lower. And I think that's one of the biggest things that you're battling when you're a founder, I think, of anything, is there's the pressure that the business actually puts on you, and then there's the pressure that you put on yourself, because of like, oh, what are people going to think if we close? What are people going to think if we have to do this? And you start this parallel thought of like what the world thinks about you, and the world doesn't even care, honestly. They're just going to follow your lead. So you have to, if your lead needs to be around long-term focus.
So how much have you guys raised right now?
So now total, we've raised about $5.4 million. And that, yeah.
And how many meetings did it take? Like I want to talk about I want to ask that question because that's success is what people will see. I want to talk about the failures, right? How many meetings did it take? What's some bad experiences? Let's get into it, because I think we can. Yeah, and especially today in 2020, the racial equality is big. Let's get into this a little bit deeper, right?
Totally.
So first and foremost, just for anyone, like obviously you didn't raise $5 million with one meeting and you were done, right?
I wish.
So let's talk about some of those failures, right?
Yeah. So this is what I'd say is, if you want to see the difference, so it took me 3.5 months to raise the first $150,000 for Localeur. As a Black founder who, this is my resume. I first person in my family to graduate from college. I then worked in DC as a speechwriter to basically a cabinet level official. And then I moved back to Austin and I started a social media consulting agency, of which my first deal was a 6-figure deal with FedEx. I then run the first ever fashion part of South by Southwest, which is profitable both years. So I had a pretty decent resume. And then I was the director of operations for Bazaar Voice pre-IPO, right? So I raised $150,000 in 3.5 months. My co-founder, after about 3 years with Localeur, he kind of got burnt out and he left. He started a new thing. In the first 3 months of his new thing, he raised $800,000. And he's a white male, handsome white male at that. And his resume was, he was a junior designer at Bazaar Voice. I'll just tell you, my salary at Bazaar Voice was almost $170,000 a year. His salary at Bazaar Voice was less than $75,000 a year. So that was us going in, right? And then he and I both worked at Bazaar Voice, of which I was the CEO. So resume wise, I was so far ahead of him, but that's the difference, right? The difference is right there. Like he was able to raise a number that I couldn't even have fathomed in the first 3 months of my next venture. So that's the disparity there. So in terms of my meetings, I would say I have 109 investors, 109 angel investors. On average, they've each put in $50,000. Some of them have put in 25,000. Some of them put in 100, but the average is 50. Right? That's how you get to the 5.4 number. So to get those 109 investors, I have probably pitched between 350 and 400 investors.
Wow.
And here's the crazy stat. There is one VC firm on my cap table, and it's Backstage Capital, which is run by a black woman named Arlen Hamilton. They're the only VC on my cap table, and they invested, I think, year 4 in us. And that's out of over 95 VC firms that I pitched. At one point, our site traffic grew from, I think, 13,000 to 140,000 month MAUs in like a few months. And we should have been able to raise a $1 million seed round like hundreds of other startups between 2012 and 2018 when money was just flying around for seed rounds. But again, we weren't able to. I even had one of the partners at Y Combinator call us a potential Yelp killer, and we still didn't get accepted to Y Combinator, nor did we raise any money from VCs until Arlen.
So, what advice would you give, another founder that is going to go through this, or obviously we don't want to disparage anybody to start because you want them to still start, but like what did work? Because you obviously still have some success, not at the level that you wish it was at, but what advice would you have?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll say, even before I go into answering that, I'll say I'm really thankful now that I wasn't able to raise that money because I own far more of the company than most founders do in year 7.5 of their business. I independently I control and operate Localeur today. I could wake up today and sell it and not have to get any approval for anyone. So I have the voting control, I have the equity control, and that's not common. But what I will say is I have had not been able to act in an abundance in the way that, like, let's say when we started, one of our competitors was Foursquare. Foursquare has raised over $230 million in VC. Are they worth billions and billions of dollars? No. But they raised $230 million, right? So now if I were even able to raise 10% of that, let's say $20 million, then Local would be a much different business today. But what I did have success doing was I realized probably about 4 years into Localeur that pitching VCs was a waste of my time. And instead, what I did is I realized that I could pitch angel investors really effectively because angel investors weren't thinking about limited partners that they had to think about from an investment standpoint. They were thinking about, is Localeur solving a problem that I care about? And if you're a traveler, then you care about what we're solving. Like, I haven't met a traveler yet who's like, man, I just love going all those tourist traps, so I don't want this Localeur thing.
Or spending 25 hours researching.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Where to go?
Yeah. So basically, what I did is I started approaching the investors very much the way that I approached the new Localeurs, and I basically said I'm going to build a community of investors. So through approaching them that way, approaching them as users, approaching them as people who are going to benefit from what we're building, it allowed me to have far more success. And that's basically what I've done is turning it less into a story around these outsized crazy returns that VCs expect and demand, but turning it more into a story around, this may not be this crazy huge outcome, but we will fulfill our mission. When I started out, my early investors would ask me, like, how big. I had VCs asking me, like, is this just an Austin thing? And I was like, because they were like, does Austin care about local? And I was like, no, this is an Austin thing. Then we expanded to New York, LA, San Francisco, Houston. And then people were like, oh, is this just a millennial thing? And it's like, no, like, not just millennials care about it. So there was always this barrier, right? And now I would always say there are probably 250 to 300 cities around the world that need Localeur. Like, you literally can't just show up in any of these cities and have the best possible experience because you would have to live there as a local to have the best possible experience. But Localeur can help. And so now today we're in 188 cities. So we're almost there. Like we are not that far away from the number of cities that I think that really Localer. Once you have Localer in 250, 300 cities around the world, it's like you can, it's almost like having a friend that lives in that city wherever you go. So that's what I really sold to those investors, and the more we grew, the more they saw, man, you're right. Like whenever I go to a new place, I want this.
So let's talk about COVID. What happened? What did you guys have to do? Easy, hard? Like what happened with COVID for you guys?
So I mean, March through mid May was just pure, honestly, like triage. You know, thankfully, again, because I haven't had the ability to raise a ton of money compared to our competitors, I think even Yelp raised like 26 or 30 something million. So we just haven't raised anything close to these companies. We never had a high burn rate. So we grew to over 150 cities with 3 employees. So we really learned scale. We were forced to learn scale and capital efficiency. So what that helped is that when COVID hit, our burn rate was already really low. And so I didn't have to lay anyone off and all that stuff because we were already not spending a lot of money. But what we did have to do is we had like partnerships and stuff that slowed down. We had a partnership with Nike that we had been working on that the brakes hit real fast on us. We had a 4-year relationship with JetBlue that had just stopped. So all this, it really affected our revenue. And thankfully, I have this 24-person advisory board that consists of 24 of our most kind of influential localers around the world, Hong Kong, Madrid, New York, LA, that kind of thing. Every year I fly them to Austin and we have an advisory board retreat. So we had just had that in early November of last year. And one of the big things that came out of that was that we all agreed that we should introduce a subscription product. And so we kind of talked about the pricing, the structure. And when COVID hit, it became not an if, but when. And so pretty much when COVID hit and our revenue slowed down dramatically, we were saying, okay, we have to do this. So I made the decision by April that come June 1st, we were going to completely switch to subscription. So we shut down our website, we shut down our free app, and we completely rebuilt the site from scratch. It's focused on just basically encouraging people to become subscribers to Localeur. We launched it June 1st. In August, we launched the road trip guide. That was our first big successful thing. We made more money in the first week of our road trip guide, the first week of August of this year, from our website than like in the previous 3 years of our website combined. Because we
and that's awesome, right? Because people they're wanting to do road trips now. I mean,
exactly,
and that's that nimbleness of the smaller company.
Yep.
And able to kind of pick and choose where to go. And are you guys starting to see more international travelers use the subscription model on the site, or is it still pretty not quite there yet?
It's very US centric right now. Our subscriber base is, I think it's 95% US travelers. And what I would say is, while our old site and app had more international usage, the thing that I like about it being US centric right now with the subscribers is that I told my team, and I wanted to make sure that when we launched the subscription, it wasn't, we're changing Localeur. No, it's like we launched a brand new business. So we're treating the subscription business like it's a brand new business, and we just launched, So if we were just launching it, maybe we wouldn't have too many international subscribers just yet, right? That's going to require its own dedicated marketing strategy in 2021. But for right now, I think we're being very effective with our subscription strategy for people in the US, especially here in Austin. So that's kind of what we're doing is we're saying, hey, like now more than ever, you need to have a lot of confidence before you go somewhere. And we're going to be that layer that provides that confidence to you.
Where do you see yourself or the company, or however you want to take it, 5 years from now, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of fun things happening. AR is going to come around. There's a lot of cool stuff. What do you see yourself in 5 years?
I mean, I think two big things need to happen. I think one is Localeur is not in the business of building audience. So now that we switched to subscription, especially our web traffic and our app traffic went way down, right? So now it's like we're not so much focused on building a site that's going to reach 5 million travelers tomorrow as we are like how can we deliver value to 500 subscribers or 5,000 subscribers or 50,000 subscribers one day. So now that we're out of the audience growth business and we don't have to spend money to build audience, what it's allowing us to do is focus more on like quality. So what I would say is for us, Localeur 5 years from now is one, we're partnered with a company that has audience. So whether that could be any big travel platform, because they're all pretty big and focused on transactions. So Airbnb, Booking.com, Expedia, TripAdvisor, all these companies have hundreds of millions of people coming to their websites every year or their apps. So they have audience. So we should partner directly with one of them and provide value add services to their customers, their users. That'll give us the scale. But the second piece is, to your point about AR, especially the ability to see into a place is going to go up, right? So I can imagine in 5 years from now, when we're giving our subscribers itineraries, we're not just giving them text. We're giving them like, hey, click this, and you're going to visually go into this place for 15 seconds and get a feel for it, right? So I think that that's something that's going to be possible. And the great thing is because we have all these locals around the world, I think we're going to have a leg up on competitors because we've already built the community, whereas everyone else is going to have to figure out a way to use technology to like do the things that humans do. And there's going to be a lot of lag in doing that. I mean, a perfect example, look at Google, like anything that Google's ever tried around social media has not worked because engineers and technology can only do so much. At some point, you still have to figure out how to build a business that requires human input. And we've done that.
Completely agree. So here's my last question. And every podcast with this question is, how would you like to be remembered?
I really want to be remembered as a community builder and as someone who paved the way for other underestimated founders to succeed. When I think especially about, I use this analogy a lot of, I'm not the Jackie Robinson of Black founders in tech. That person's already happened. But what people don't remember is between Jackie Robinson and modern day, every team had to at some point have their first or second Black baseball player. So no one remembers who the first Black player was for all the other teams in Major League Baseball. They just remember Jackie. To me, I'm one of those people. I'm one of those people who's like an unsung hero, kind of like that movie Hidden Figures. Like I'm one of those people who maybe it won't be for 30 or 40 years that people even know that like people like me existed to pave the way for some future Black tech billionaire. But I want to be remembered as someone who built a community and paved the way for people like that. And the great thing is, I could still be one of those people who's crazy successful. Like I could be Willie Mays or Hank Aaron, who was also they were early Black baseball players, just not as early as Jackie, right? So that could still be me. But even if it's not, I know that I'm one of those people in the 40s, 50s who was integrating those teams and fighting the good fight and suffering the consequences in a lot of ways, but in order to pave a way for people to have it easier than me.
Wow, I love it. That's fantastic. Well, Joe, it was a big pleasure to have you on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. So much value in this episode. I think we could have gone on for hours and hours.
Yeah, but, thanks for having me.
All right, I appreciate it. Cheers.
Thanks so much.